I'm Evelyn Carter, 29, and on the night of my sister's birthday, I learned exactly what my parents thought of me. The table was filled with champagne, laughter, and fake love until my father stood up and announced that my inheritance would go to my sisters instead. Everyone applauded, thinking it was a joke. I smiled, pretending it didn't sting. But a few weeks later, when the lawyer read my grandfather's will, their laughter died in the same room it was born. Everything they believed was theirs, the houses, the business, the legacy, belonged to me. And it started the ruthless battle in family. The chandelier above the dining room table glimmered like frozen fire, its crystals catching every flicker of candlelight and bouncing it back onto the faces of people pretending to love one another. My family had always been good at pretending the perfect suburban illusion, all smiles and champagne, polished laughter echoing off the walls of our ocean view home. But I knew what hid beneath the gloss: resentment, entitlement, and the quiet hunger for control. It was my sister Madison's birthday, and everything sparkled for her: the gold-trimmed cake, the blush roses lining the table, the way my mother kept calling her our golden girl. I sat at the far end of the table, the forgotten place, next to an empty chair no one had bothered to fill. The air smelled like sugared wine and expensive perfume, but underneath it lingered something sour, something only I could taste. My father stood, tapping his glass with the back of a silver spoon. The room hushed instantly, all eyes on him, as though his words carried the weight of gospel. My mother placed a hand over her heart, smiling that kind of smile that didn't touch her eyes. He began, his tone slow and deliberate, the kind people use when they want to make sure everyone hears. "Your mother and I have been thinking a lot about the future," he said, glancing toward Madison and our youngest sister, Claire. "And tonight feels like the perfect time to share something special." Madison leaned forward, her grin wide, like she already knew she was about to be celebrated again. Claire giggled beside her, clutching her champagne glass like it was a trophy. I stayed still, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass, watching the reflection of the candlelight ripple through the liquid. My father continued, his voice rich with pride. "We've decided to pass down the family inheritance, all of it, to your sisters. They've shown such dedication, such promise." There was a gasp, followed by applause. My mother beamed. Madison's eyes glistened. Claire clapped her hands together like a child at a magic show. And I just smiled. The kind of smile that hides storms behind still water. I raised my glass slowly, as though to toast their generosity, and said nothing. No one noticed the quiet. No one noticed how my grip tightened around the stem of the glass, or how the corners of my lips didn't quite reach my eyes. I think my father mistook my silence for acceptance, a daughter's quiet surrender. He'd always underestimated silence. The rest of the night played out like a performance. Madison opened gifts, our parents bragged about her new job at the firm, and Claire danced barefoot in the living room, tipsy and loud. I watched them all, each movement etching itself into my memory like a scene I knew I'd revisit. But beneath the laughter, I felt the burn of something electric, not anger exactly, but clarity. Later that night, when the house finally dimmed and the guests were gone, I stepped outside onto the terrace. The ocean stretched endlessly below, black and cold, the moon caught in its waves. I could still hear their laughter inside, faint now, like echoes of something hollow. I took a breath, the salt air stinging my throat, and whispered, "Thank you." Because sometimes, betrayal is a gift. It tells you who people really are. The weeks after that dinner passed quietly, almost deceptively so. My parents acted as though the conversation had never happened. Madison called once or twice to brag about her promotion. Claire sent me photos of her latest designer handbags. They didn't notice the shift in me, the calm that settled in place of hurt. They mistook it for distance, maybe even disinterest. But my grandfather noticed. He always had. Grandpa Thomas wasn't a man easily fooled. While the rest of my family had been busy performing perfection, he'd been watching not with judgment, but with quiet observation. His house, a sprawling estate tucked behind iron gates and oak trees, had always felt like a refuge. He'd invite me there for tea, sometimes under the pretense of needing help with paperwork, but I knew he just wanted company that didn't come with noise or pride. One afternoon, A week after Madison's birthday, I sat across from him at his oak desk. His eyes, faded blue and sharp as glass, studied me carefully. "I heard about the birthday dinner," he said softly, folding his hands. I met his gaze. "Of course you did." He gave a short, dry chuckle. "Your mother never could keep her triumphs to herself." I didn't reply. The air between us was heavy with understanding, the kind that didn't need words. He leaned back, eyes drifting to the photograph of my grandmother that still sat on the edge of his desk. "She used to say," he murmured, "that a person's true nature comes out when they think no one's watching." He looked back at me then. "Seems like you've seen quite a bit of that lately." I nodded. "Enough to know where I stand." He smiled faintly, a sad sort of smile. "Good," he said. "Then you'll understand what I need to do." He didn't explain what that meant, and I didn't ask. But when I left that day, I caught him looking after me, his expression unreadable, almost determined. A month later, he was gone. The news came early in the morning, a phone call from his lawyer, Mr. Rourke. His voice was calm, practiced, almost too formal as he explained the details. I sat on my bed, sunlight bleeding through the curtains, the phone cold against my ear. The funeral came and went in a blur of black dresses and carefully arranged sorrow. My parents wept loud enough for attention. Madison dabbed her eyes with tissues between whispered conversations about estate matters. Claire complained about the catering. I stayed by the casket, my hand resting on the polished wood, thinking of tea and the faint smell of tobacco that always clung to his sweaters. He had told me once, "You don't owe anyone your silence when the truth is on your side." And yet, silence was exactly what I chose. Until the day the will was read. The lawyer's office was sterile, polished mahogany, leather chairs, and the faint hum of air conditioning. My family filled the room like they owned it, my mother's pearls gleaming under the lights, my father sitting with his legs crossed in quiet anticipation. Madison whispered to Claire, her tone smug and certain. Mr. Rourke entered, his briefcase clasped tightly in one hand. He greeted each of us, though his eyes lingered on me a fraction longer. Then he took his seat, opened a thick folder, and began. "According to the last and final testament of Mr. Thomas W. Carter," he started, his voice calm and deliberate, "the estate, including all assets, properties, and accounts, is to be transferred solely to his granddaughter, Ms. Evelyn Carter." For a moment, the world held its breath. Then silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The words seemed to hang in the air like the sound of shattered glass, still ringing after the break. My mother's hand flew to her chest. My father leaned forward, confusion breaking through his composure. Madison's mouth fell open, and Claire's eyes darted wildly between us. "That can't be right," my father said finally, his voice sharp. "There must be some mistake." Mr. Rourke shook his head. "There is no mistake, sir. Mr. Carter updated his will 2 weeks before his passing." He pulled out a sealed letter and placed it on the table. He instructed me to read this if there were objections. The paper crackled as he unfolded it, his voice steady as he began to read. "To my family, I've lived long enough to see what pride does to people. I watched the way you treated Evelyn, the disregard, the condescension, the cruelty masked as laughter. I saw enough to know who carries the true spirit of this family. She will bear our name with integrity, and the rest of you, I hope you learn humility in time." When he finished, the silence in the room was deafening. My mother whispered something under her breath, her voice trembling. Madison looked like she might faint. Claire's lip quivered, tears pooling but not falling. My father just stared at me, eyes narrow, searching for something he couldn't find, maybe guilt, maybe triumph. But there was none. I simply smiled. The same quiet smile I had worn that night at the table. Because revenge doesn't always arrive in anger. Sometimes it walks in wearing a black suit, holding a sealed envelope, and speaks in the calm voice of justice. As we left the office, my mother reached for my arm. Her voice broke. "Evelyn, please, we didn't mean." I stopped her with a look. "You meant every word," I said softly. And so did he. The silence after the will reading didn't end in that office. It followed us home like a shadow no one wanted to acknowledge. Every phone call, Every creak in the house seemed louder than it should have been. By morning, the family group chat had gone from celebration emojis to pure stillness. Not one message, not even from Claire, who never managed to stay quiet longer than 10 minutes. I didn't move back into the house after Grandpa's passing. I stayed in my apartment downtown, where the noise of the city muffled everything that used to crawl under my skin. From my balcony, I could see the skyline, the river reflecting streaks of light like veins of gold. It was strange. I'd never felt freer, yet never more watched. 3 days later, my father showed up unannounced. I saw his reflection in the glass before he knocked stiff shoulders, forced calm, a man used to control. I opened the door halfway. He tried to push a smile. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. "You already did." He looked around, his gaze moving over the clean living room, the framed photographs, the quiet simplicity of it. "You could have told us," he said finally. "I didn't know," I replied. "He didn't tell me anything before he died." He nodded slowly, though his jaw tightened. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," I said. "You asked a question," I answered. He sat down, hands clasped together, the weight of his pride pressing into every movement. "Your mother's not sleeping. Claire's been crying. Madison hasn't gone to work in a week. This whole thing blindsided us." I crossed my arms. "Maybe it shouldn't have." His eyes snapped up. "You think we deserve this?" "I think you earned it," I said, voice calm but sharp enough to leave a mark. The words hung in the air, heavier than any argument we'd ever had. He stood after a moment, straightened his jacket, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused. "You're still our daughter," he said, but it sounded more like a warning than comfort. "Then you should have remembered that sooner," I answered. He left without looking back. By the end of the week, the story had reached the rest of the family. Cousins, aunts, even old friends started calling, pretending to check on me while fishing for gossip. The rumor was simple. I had manipulated Grandpa in his final days. I'd taken advantage of his grief, of his old age. I let them talk. People always prefer a scandal over a truth that makes them uncomfortable. But it didn't stop there. Madison started posting pictures again, smiling with friends, expensive cocktails in hand, except every caption was a knife disguised as grace. "Some people forget loyalty when money's involved," one read. Another said, "Family isn't blood, it's honesty." The comments poured in. Support, sympathy, validation. Her followers didn't know the truth, they only knew her version. That's when I realized they weren't just angry. They were regrouping. A week later, I was called back to the lawyer's office. Mr. Rourke handed me a set of folders, his expression cautious. "Your grandfather's estate includes several properties," he explained. "But there's one you should see yourself, the lake house in Hollow Ridge." He mentioned it specifically. The lake house. I hadn't been there in years. It was where we used to spend summers before my parents turned every trip into another showcase of who could impress Grandpa the most. I remembered him sitting by the water, fishing rod in hand, always asking if I wanted to learn. The drive out was quiet. The air grew colder as the city faded behind me, replaced by forest and open sky. When I reached the property, the gate creaked open like it was exhaling after years of silence. The house stood exactly as I remembered: stone walls, ivy climbing up the sides, windows clouded with dust. Inside, everything was preserved, almost waiting. I found a letter on the old piano, sealed in the same thick paper Grandpa used for his correspondence. My name was written across it in his neat handwriting. I sat on the couch, tore it open, and read. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means the truth has settled where it belongs. The lake house is not just property, it's history. Your grandmother and I built it with our own hands before your parents learned the value of $1. It's yours now. But don't let sentiment blind you. Your mother and father will come for it. Be patient, not kind. They only understand loss when they feel it." His words were steady, almost cold. But they carried something else: trust. I folded the letter and tucked it into my coat pocket. When I looked around, the light through the window caught a photograph on the mantel. It was me and Grandpa, standing by the dock, both laughing at something I couldn't remember. For the first time in years, I let the memory soften me. Then a sound came from outside, the crunch of gravel. I moved to the window. A black SUV had pulled up at the gate. I didn't need to see their faces to know who it was. My parents never could stand being left out of a conversation that wasn't about them. The door swung open before I could reach it. My mother entered first, her face pale, but her eyes sharp as ever. My father followed, silence clinging to him like smoke. "You got here fast," I said, setting the letter down on the table. My mother's gaze swept the room. "So it's true," she said quietly. "He left this place to you too." "He left everything to me," I corrected. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't deserve it, Evelyn. You didn't earn this family's legacy." I laughed once. "You mean the legacy of taking what isn't yours? Because if that's what we're protecting, maybe I fit right in." My father stepped forward. "Enough. We're not here to fight." "Then why are you here?" I asked. "To make an offer," he said, pulling out a document. "Sign the lake house over to us. You can keep the rest. This place means more to your mother than you realize." I didn't take the paper. "You think I'd trade sentiment for self-respect?" He set the folder down hard enough to rattle the table. "You don't understand how much pressure we're under." "The company." "Grandpa's company," I interrupted. "The one you ran into the ground?" His composure cracked. "We built that business." "No," I said evenly. "He did. You just spent what he earned." The silence that followed was deep and bitter. My mother's expression shifted, no longer angry, just tired. "You've changed," she said softly. "Maybe I just stopped pretending," I replied. They didn't stay long after that. When they left, I watched from the porch as the SUV disappeared down the dirt road, its tires throwing up dust that lingered like smoke after a fire. That night, I stayed at the lake house. The power still worked, though the lights flickered faintly. I found old photo albums stacked in the cabinet, pages yellowing at the edges. In every picture, Grandpa's smile looked real. In most, my parents didn't. I sat there until midnight, the silence of the lake pressing against the walls. For the first time since the will, I let myself think about what came next. They wouldn't stop here, I knew that. My father didn't lose quietly, and my mother thrived on appearances. They'd fight, not through lawyers, but through whispers, through manipulation, through every tool they'd used their whole lives. But this time, I wasn't a spectator. As I stood to close the curtains, headlights flashed across the trees. A car engine cut off somewhere down the driveway. My pulse quickened. Someone else was here. I moved quietly to the front door, peering through the glass. A figure stepped out of the car, tall, in a dark coat, moving with purpose. When the porch light caught his face, I froze. It wasn't my father. It was Mr. Rourke. He looked up at the window, his expression unreadable, then lifted a small envelope and held it out as if to show it was meant for me. Whatever piece I'd found that evening vanished in an instant. Because the lawyer who'd closed the will wasn't supposed to be here, not at night, not unannounced, and certainly not holding another sealed letter. I opened the door slowly. The wind carried his voice when he spoke. "Miss Carter," he said, "there's something else your grandfather left behind. And I think you need to see it now." The night air was sharp when I stepped onto the porch, the moon hanging low over the still water. Mr. Rourke stood by his car, the engine off, the headlights cutting across the trees like thin blades. He held the envelope out, his gloved hand steady. "I didn't know there was anything left," I said. "Neither did I," he replied. "Your grandfather instructed me to deliver this only if your parents made another attempt to claim the estate. He said you'd know when that happened." I took the letter. It was smaller than the others, sealed with the same red wax stamp he always used. My name was written differently this time, not formal, not detached, but almost gentle. Mr. Rourke watched me for a moment, then added, "He was very clear about one thing, Evelyn. He trusted you to finish what he started." He didn't wait for questions. He got back in his car, turned the key, and disappeared down the winding road. The sound of his tires faded until all I could hear was the faint ripple of the lake. I went back inside, locked the door, and tore the seal open. Inside was a single page and a small brass key taped to the bottom corner. "Evelyn, if your parents are reading this over your shoulder, tell them to leave. They won't like what follows. There's a safe in the basement beneath the lake house. The code is the date your grandmother and I married. Inside, you'll find the final truth, one that will close every question they could raise. Use it only when they try to take what isn't theirs again. If they don't stop, let the truth speak louder than I ever could. I stared at the page for a long moment, then looked toward the old door at the back of the house that led downstairs. The basement was colder than I remembered. Dust covered the floor, and the air carried the faint scent of iron and old wood. I found the safe behind a loose panel in the wall, a steel box, heavy and silent. I turned the brass key, entered the code, and pulled the door open. Inside were 3 folders and a flash drive. Each folder had a name: David Carter, Lydia Carter, Carter Holdings, Inc. I opened the first one. It was filled with records, bank transfers, emails, loan documents. Every page revealed what my parents had hidden for years: fraud, unpaid taxes, shell companies. The money they'd flaunted wasn't theirs. It was borrowed, stolen, rerouted through the business Grandpa had built from nothing. The second folder detailed how they'd planned to sell the lake house long before he died, forging his approval to cover debts. The final one was worse: messages between my parents and Madison, discussing ways to push Grandpa into signing over full control of the company. Every word, every date, every signature evidence. I plugged in the flash drive. A single video file blinked on the screen. For Evelyn. The image flickered to life, Grandpa sitting in his study, the same room I'd visited countless times. His voice was calm, steady, and impossibly clear. "If you're watching this, it means they tried to take more than I gave them," he said. "I raised a family that forgot the difference between legacy and greed. But I also raised one granddaughter who never asked for anything but respect. This evidence belongs to you now. Do with it what you must. End this the right way." The video ended. For a while, I just sat there, the glow of the screen flickering across the dark walls. I realized then that he'd never wanted me to seek revenge. He wanted the truth to finish what pride had started. 2 days later, I met with Mr. Rourke again, this time in his office downtown. He reviewed everything, then leaned back in his chair. "These records," he said quietly, "they'll destroy them." "They already destroyed themselves," I replied. "We drafted the documents that morning: legal notices, ownership transfers, filings with the state. Every piece of evidence went exactly where it needed to go: the company board, the auditors, the authorities. I didn't hide behind lawyers or threats. I just let the facts speak." By evening, the fallout began. Madison was the first to call. Her voice shook as she spoke, no longer confident, no longer rehearsed. "You turned them in?" she asked. "I didn't turn anyone in," I said. "I just showed the truth." She started crying, not out of guilt but fear. I listened until she hung up. Later, news broke that my father had stepped down as CEO of Carter Holdings. Financial investigations were underway, and assets were being frozen. My mother stopped posting on social media entirely. Claire disappeared from the spotlight. The house that once hosted golden birthdays and champagne toasts was quiet now, blinds drawn, gates locked. I drove there once, not to gloat, just to see. The garden was overgrown, the front door chipped. Through the window, I saw my parents sitting in silence, the same silence they'd once forced me to swallow. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just closure. Weeks passed. I moved into the lake house permanently. It felt peaceful, unfinished, but mine. I kept the piano, the photographs, and the smell of cedar that clung to the walls. The rest I gave away. One afternoon, as the sun dipped over the water, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The air was cool, and the light shimmered on the surface of the lake like molten glass. My phone buzzed, an email from Mr. Rourke. Subject line: "Final notice, estate closure." Inside was a single sentence: "All assets have been transferred. Your grandfather's affairs are officially complete." I closed my laptop and leaned back, watching the water move in slow ripples. The world had shifted completely. The same family that once measured worth by inheritance now had none. And I, who'd once been invisible, was finally at peace, not because I'd won, but because I'd stopped playing their game. That night, I opened Grandpa's last letter one more time. It was the one I'd kept in the drawer by my bed, the one that ended differently from the others. "Evelyn, when you find peace, Don't look for victory. Look for silence. It means the noise has finally ended. I folded it gently, placed it back, and blew out the candle on the table. The house sank into darkness, quiet except for the wind against the windows. Outside, the lake reflected the moon like a perfect mirror, calm, unbroken, still. Everything they'd built on lies had finally collapsed. Everything he'd built on truth had endured. And for the first time, I felt like the Carter name finally meant something again.